Blood sprayed in crimson arcs against Wyoming's golden dust as the panther's claws tore through the boy's flesh. The massive cat's snarl echoed across the valley, a primal sound that silenced even the wind. Lakota, 11 summers old, and miles from his tribe, stumbled forward with one hand pressed against the gaping wound across his ribs. His vision blurred each heartbeat, pumping more life onto the parched earth beneath him. Behind him, death stalked on velvet paws, the largest black panther seen in the Medicine Bow Mountains in a generation. Its yellow eyes, cold and calculating, tracked the blood trail leading into sagebrush country. Grandfather's spirit. Lakota whispered in Lakota, his voice barely audible above his labored breathing. Not yet. I am not ready for the Shadowlands. The distant wisp of smoke rising against the azure sky represented his last hope, a settler's cabin, perched on contested land. With each faltering step, the distance between predator and prey narrowed. The panther, patient in its hunger, matched the boy's pace. It had pursued him for miles since ambushing his small party at dawn, and now the scent of blood promised the hunt would soon end. Eleanor Whitmore squinted against the merciless Wyoming sun as she brought the axe down, splitting another log with practiced precision. The summer of 1876 had scorched the territory with record heat, as if nature itself sought to drive out those who dared claim this untamed land. At 42, Eleanor had learned to embrace the solitude that had once terrified her. 3 years a widow, she had mastered tasks once reserved for men, felling trees, hunting game, and defending her homestead against all threats, both human and beast. She paused mid-swing, a prickling sensation traveling up her spine. 20 years on the frontier had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. Something approached something desperate. Eleanor set down her axe and reached for the Winchester rifle that never left her side. The territory simmered with tension since General Custer had pushed into Lakota lands. Governor Thayer's recent proclamation had made harboring any Native American a treasonous offense, punishable by hanging. Yet Eleanor had never been one to let politics override her conscience. "Show yourself," she called, her Boston accent long softened by years in Wyoming. "I won't ask twice." The brush parted, revealing not the Lakota warrior she had braced for, but a child. His copper skin was slick with blood that pulsed from 3 deep gashes across his side. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The boy's dark eyes, wide with terror and pain, locked with hers across 20 feet of dust-blown yard. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a small broken sound emerged before his legs gave way beneath him. For 3 heartbeats, Eleanor remained frozen. Helping a Lakota child, even a dying one, could cost her everything: her homestead, her freedom, perhaps her life. Governor Thayer's men had hanged settlers for less. Then the boy's hand twitched in the dust, and compassion overrode caution. She crossed the yard in swift strides, kneeling beside the unconscious child. His pulse fluttered against her fingers like a trapped bird. The wounds were deep claw marks, not bullets or arrows. No human had inflicted this damage. Eleanor glanced toward the tree line, suddenly aware that whatever had attacked the boy might still be hunting. "You've walked into a hornet's nest, child," she murmured, gathering his slight form into her arms. The decision made, Eleanor carried him swiftly into her cabin and laid him on her own bed. With practiced hands, she cut away his blood-soaked buckskin shirt, revealing the full extent of the damage. 3 parallel gashes ran from his shoulder to his lower ribs, the deepest dangerously close to vital organs. Eleanor worked methodically, cleansing the wounds with whiskey that made the unconscious boy flinch and moan. She packed the gashes with yarrow leaves, crushed into a poultice, her hands steady despite the enormity of her choice. Outside the afternoon, shadows lengthened toward evening. She was just finishing the neat sutures, closing the worst wound, when a sound froze her in place, the distant bugle call of a cavalry patrol. "Damn," Eleanor whispered quickly, gathering the bloodied cloths. The boy couldn't be moved, not with fresh stitches. She scanned the cabin's interior, her mind racing. The root cellar James had dug it their first year, lined with stone to keep vegetables cool through summer. Eleanor had never imagined it would serve as a hiding place. She stripped back the woven rug in the main room, revealing the trapdoor. With gentle hands, she wrapped the boy in a clean blanket and carried him down the narrow ladder, settling him on a bed of empty burlap sacks. "Stay silent," she whispered, though he remained unconscious. "I'll return when they're gone." Eleanor closed the trap door and replaced the rug, just as hoofbeats thundered into her yard. She scrubbed her blood-stained hands with lye soap, pinched color into her cheeks, and opened the door before the soldiers could knock. 5 cavalrymen sat astride dust-covered horses, their blue uniforms dark with sweat. Their leader, a lieutenant with cold eyes and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, removed his hat with practiced courtesy. "Afternoon, ma'am. Lieutenant Wilson, 7th Cavalry. Mind if we water our horses at your creek?" "Help yourselves, Lieutenant," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady. "There's a dipper on the well if your men are thirsty." Wilson nodded in acknowledgement. "Been seeing any unusual activity around your place, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Eleanor Whitmore." She forced a small smile. "And no, it's been quiet. Too quiet with this heat baking everything alive." The lieutenant dismounted his spurs, jingling against the hard-packed earth. "Reports of Lakota scouts in the area, probably gathering intelligence for Sitting Bull." His eyes swept her cabin's exterior. "Dangerous time to be living alone, ma'am. I manage," Eleanor said simply, her fingers unconsciously tracing the jagged scar on her forearm, a souvenir from a rabid wolf she'd fought off 2 winters prior. "My husband chose this land. I mean to keep it." "Admirable but foolish," Wilson replied, his tone sharpening. "The savages are growing bold since Custer moved into the Black Hills. Wouldn't take much for them to decide a lone woman's cabin makes an easy target." A younger soldier had wandered toward the side of the house where Eleanor had treated the boy. He crouched, suddenly examining the ground. "Sir, he called blood here, fresh." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression remained impassive. "Shot a coyote this morning. Been after my chickens for a week." Lieutenant Wilson's gaze never left her face, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Where's the carcass?" "Dragged it about a quarter-mile out." She lied, the words flowing smoothly. "Don't like to leave dead things near the house. Draws scavengers." The soldier, examining the blood, straightened his hand instinctively, moving to his holstered pistol. "That's a lot of blood for a coyote, ma'am." Eleanor shrugged. "Hit an artery, I suppose. I'm a fair shot when something threatens what's mine." Something shifted in Lieutenant Wilson's expression, a flicker of suspicion replacing professional detachment. "Mind if we take a look inside Mrs. Whitmore's standard procedure when we're tracking hostiles?" She stepped aside, praying the rug adequately concealed the trap door. "Nothing much to see, but you're welcome to look." The soldiers filed into her small cabin boots, tracking dust across her swept floor. Eleanor stood in the doorway, willing herself to appear calm as they inspected her modest home. Lieutenant Wilson ran his fingers along her bookshelf. Milton, Shakespeare, and the Bible, all brought from Boston when she'd married James. "Educated woman," he commented, something unreadable in his tone. "I taught school before I came west," Eleanor replied. Books were easier to transport than friends. Another soldier opened her cupboards, peering inside. "Ma'am, you've got enough preserves to last 3 winters. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I prepare for hard times, soldier. This land doesn't forgive those who don't." Lieutenant Wilson stepped toward her bedroom, and Eleanor's breath caught. Had she missed something? The lieutenant paused at the threshold, scanning the small space, the neatly made bed, the plain wooden chest, the daguerreotype of James on the bedside table. "Your husband?" he asked, nodding toward the image. "Yes. James died 3 years ago. Fever took him in 3 days." Wilson's expression softened marginally. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." He turned away, but another soldier called from outside. Lieutenant tracks here, heading into the brush. Small ones could be a boy. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the door frame until her knuckles whitened. Probably deer. They come for the vegetable scraps I throw out. Wilson studied her face again, his eyes suddenly cold as January ice. Corporal Hayes has been tracking Lakota for 15 years, ma'am. He knows the difference between deer and human tracks. Before Eleanor could respond, a low guttural growl erupted from the tree line. All heads turned as a massive shape slunk from the shadows, a black panther, its muscular body rippling as it stalked toward the cabin. Its yellow eyes assessed the humans with predatory intelligence, tail lashing slowly from side to side. Sweet Jesus. One of the soldiers whispered, fumbling for his rifle. Hold fire, Lieutenant Wilson ordered sharply. Panthers don't usually attack groups of armed men. The big cat paused, nostrils flaring as it scented the air. Eleanor realized with mounting horror that it was following the boy's blood trail straight to her cabin. The beast had tracked its prey for miles, and it wouldn't be denied its kill. Mrs. Whitmore, get inside. Wilson commanded, his voice tense. We'll handle this. Eleanor didn't move. If the panther attacked and the soldiers pursued it around the property, they might discover more evidence of the boy's presence. Worse gunfire might carry to other Lakota in the area. If the boy had family searching for him, the panther growled again, a sound that seemed to vibrate the very air. Its muscles bunched, preparing to spring. Lieutenant, Eleanor said suddenly, shooting will only make it angry unless you kill it outright. Let me try something. Without waiting for permission, she stepped into the yard and seized a burning branch from her cooking fire. The panther's eyes tracked the flame as she waved it in a wide arc, advancing slowly. For a tense moment, woman and beast locked eyes across the dusty yard, two predators assessing each other's resolve. Get back, you devil, Eleanor whispered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. There's no meal for you here. As if understanding her words, the panther's ears flattened against its skull. With a final snarl of defiance, it turned and melted back into the brush. That was damn foolhardy, ma'am, Lieutenant Wilson said as she returned to the porch, her legs suddenly weak with relief. Panthers fear fire, she replied. My husband taught me that. Sometimes the boldest move is the safest. Wilson nodded, though suspicion still clouded his face. We should be moving on. Patrols due back at Fort Laramie by nightfall. He mounted his horse, adjusting his hat against the late afternoon sun. Mrs. Whitmore, if you see any sign of Lakota in the area, fire 3 shots in succession. There's a patrol within earshot of this valley every day around noon. I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant. Wilson hesitated, his horse shifting restlessly beneath him. The boys' tracks, ma'am. They don't continue past your cabin. His eyes bored into hers. If you know something you're not telling us, now's the time. Harboring hostiles is a hanging offense, even for a widow. Eleanor met his stare, her face a mask of frontier stoicism. I've told you what I know, Lieutenant. Now, if you don't mind, I have chores to finish before dark. Wilson touched the brim of his hat. Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. He turned his horse and led his men away, dust rising from beneath their horses' hooves. Eleanor waited until they disappeared around the bend before rushing inside. Her hands trembled as she pulled back the rug and opened the trap door. The boy lay exactly as she'd left him, still unconscious, but breathing steadily. She checked his wounds, no fresh bleeding. The yarrow poultice seemed to be working. As she closed the trap door, a new thought surfaced. The panther was still hunting the boy. The beast had tracked him to her cabin and would likely return. Eleanor moved to her rifle and checked the load. Only 3 bullets remained in the magazine. She would need to be precise. If the panther returned, a wounded predator was more dangerous than a hungry one. The night passed in tense vigilance, Eleanor dozing in her rocking chair with the Winchester across her lap. Shortly after midnight, a sound from the cellar roused her. She lit a lamp and opened the trap door to find the boy attempting to climb the ladder, his face contorted with pain and fear. "Easy," she said softly, descending to help him. "You'll tear your stitches." The boy recoiled, pressing himself against the earthen wall. He spoke rapidly in Lakota, his voice hoarse with pain. Though Eleanor couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. He expected harm from this white woman. "I won't hurt you," she said, keeping her distance. She set the lamp on a step and showed empty hands. "You're safe here." The boy's dark eyes darted around the cellar, seeking escape. Eleanor recognized the desperate calculation of a trapped animal. Slowly, she mimed eating, touching her mouth and stomach. Hungry food. After a moment's hesitation, the boy nodded once. "Stay here," Eleanor said, pointing to the floor. "I'll bring food." She returned with broth and cornbread, setting them on the bottom step before retreating halfway up the ladder. The boy watched her warily before hunger overcame caution. He snatched the bowl and bread, devouring them with the desperate speed of one accustomed to scarcity. "My name is Eleanor," she said, tapping her chest. "Eleanor." The boy paused in his eating, studying her face in the lamplight. "Dakota," he finally replied, pressing his palm to his own chest. "Dakota," Eleanor repeated. "What were you doing so far from your people, Dakota?" The boy didn't respond to the English words, but his hand moved to his wounds, then formed claws that he swept through the air. He growled a startlingly accurate imitation of the panther. "The big cat was hunting you." Eleanor nodded. "I understand." Dakota set down the empty bowl and spoke again, his hands gesturing to create a story Eleanor couldn't fully comprehend. She gathered he had been separated from others, perhaps on some kind of journey or hunt. The panther had ambushed them, forcing Dakota to flee into territory he knew was dangerous white settler land. "You need rest," Eleanor said when he finished. She pointed to his side, then mimed sleeping. "More healing before you can travel." Dakota's expression hardened, and he shook his head firmly. He pointed east in the direction the soldiers had gone, then drew his finger across his throat. The meaning was unmistakable. He knew the danger of being discovered. "The soldiers are gone," Eleanor assured him. "But they'll be back if they find your trail. You can't travel with those wounds." She pointed to the cellar around them. "Hide here. Safe." Trust came slowly to the boy's eyes, but exhaustion ultimately won. He allowed Eleanor to check his wounds and change the poultice before settling back onto the makeshift bed she'd created. Within minutes, he was asleep again. Eleanor climbed back to the main room, conflicted emotions churning within her. Housing the boy was dangerous, potentially fatal if discovered. Yet she couldn't turn him out, not wounded, and with both soldiers and a panther hunting him. Something about his fierce determination reminded her of the son she'd lost in childbirth years ago. A child who never had the chance to grow into a boy like Dakota. For 3 days, Eleanor and Dakota established a cautious routine. The boy remained hidden in the cellar during daylight, emerging only after dark, when Eleanor could be certain no unexpected visitors would arrive. She taught him English words, and he, in turn, shared Lakota phrases. Gradually, their communication improved. She learned that Dakota was the nephew of a respected warrior named War Eagle, sent with 2 older boys to deliver a message to a neighboring band. The panther had attacked their camp at dawn, killing 1 boy instantly. Dakota and his cousin had fled in different directions, hoping to confuse the predator. Whether his cousin had survived, Dakota didn't know. On the 4th morning, Eleanor woke to an ominous silence. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered in the nearby trees. She grabbed her rifle and moved cautiously to the window. The panther had returned. It prowled the edge of the clearing, massive paws silent on the dusty ground, yellow eyes fixed on the cabin. The beast knew its prey was inside. A Dakota, she whispered, shaking the boy awake where he slept on a pallet near the fire. "The Panther is back. Get to the cellar." Dakota's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. Without a sound, he slipped through the trap door, pulling it closed behind him. Eleanor positioned herself at the window, rifle ready. The Panther was circling the cabin now, searching for a way in. Its powerful shoulders bunched as it leapt onto the low roof of the lean-to, where Eleanor stored tools and firewood. The roof creaked under the cat's weight. Eleanor aimed carefully through the window, waiting for a clean shot. She had only 3 bullets. She couldn't afford to waste a single one. The Panther paced along the edge of the roof, then dropped out of sight. Moments later, a crash came from the back of the cabin. The beast had broken through the thin boards that formed the lean-to's rear wall. Eleanor spun, aiming at the narrow door that connected the storage space to her cabin. Sharp claws scraped against wood as the Panther sought entry. The door shuddered under the animal's weight. It wouldn't hold long. Outside, a new sound cut through the morning air. Hoofbeats approaching fast. Eleanor's heart sank. Visitors now with a Panther trying to break into her home, and a Lakota boy hidden in her cellar. The situation couldn't be worse. The door to the lean-to splintered as the Panther hurled itself forward again. Eleanor fired the shot, deafening in the confined space. A yowl of pain told her she'd hit her mark, but not fatally. The wounded predator crashed through the weakened door, landing in her kitchen with fangs bared and blood seeping from a shoulder wound. Eleanor worked the lever on her Winchester, chambering another round, her second-to-last bullet. The beast gathered itself to spring, yellow eyes burning with hatred. She aimed for its chest, knowing she had to stop its heart or risk being torn apart. Her finger tightened on the trigger just as the cabin door burst open behind her. "Hey, Mrs. Whitmore." Lieutenant Wilson shouted, pistol drawn. The Panther, startled by the new threat, redirected its attack toward the officer. Wilson fired twice the bullets, tearing into the cat's chest. The Panther stumbled, blood pouring from its wounds, but incredibly kept coming. Its massive body slammed into Wilson, sending both man and beast crashing to the floor. Eleanor leveled her rifle and fired her second bullet, catching the Panther in the spine. The animal collapsed, twitching violently. Wilson scrambled away, his uniform torn and bloody. "Are you hurt?" Eleanor asked, helping him to his feet, rifle still gripped in her other hand, with its final bullet ready. "Scratches mostly." The lieutenant answered, breathing heavily. "We saw the beast circling your place as we rode up. Figured you might need assistance." He looked down at the dying Panther. "Biggest one I've ever seen." 2 more soldiers appeared in the doorway, rifles ready. "Lieutenant," one called. "It's nearly dead." Wilson confirmed, holstering his pistol. "Mrs. Whitmore and I managed to take it down." The Panther gave a final convulsive jerk, its massive body slamming into the kitchen table. The table legs scraped across the floor, pulling the rug with them and revealing the trapdoor beneath. Lieutenant Wilson's expression hardened instantly. "Open it," he ordered, drawing his pistol again. Eleanor's mind raced for a plausible explanation, finding none. With resignation, she knelt and pulled up the trapdoor. Dakota crouched at the bottom of the ladder, a small knife clutched in his hand, and defiance blazing in his eyes. "Step back from the boy, Mrs. Whitmore," Wilson said coldly, aiming his weapon at Dakota. "He's just a child, Lieutenant," Eleanor protested, not moving. "Wounded by that Panther, I couldn't turn him away." "And that child is a Lakota spy," Wilson spat. "And you, ma'am, are harboring an enemy of the United States government." The 2 soldiers moved into the cabin, rifles trained on Dakota. The boy remained motionless, his face a mask of dignified resignation beyond his years. He had expected this end from the moment he crossed into white territory. "I won't let you hurt him." Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She positioned herself between the soldiers and the cellar opening. He's done nothing wrong. Wilson's face flushed with anger. Step aside, Mrs. Whitmore. That's an order. This is my home, Lieutenant. You have no authority here. In a time of war, ma'am, the military has authority everywhere. Wilson motioned to his men. Secure the savage and arrest Mrs. Whitmore for treason. Eleanor raised her rifle, pointing it squarely at Wilson's chest. I have one bullet left, Lieutenant. It's meant for that Panther if it still lives, but I'll use it on any man who tries to take this boy. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then a new sound drifted through the open door. War cries, followed by pounding hoofbeats. The soldiers' faces paled. Lakota war party. One shouted, rushing to the window. At least a dozen braves. Wilson turned to Eleanor, fury and fear mingling in his expression. You signaled them somehow. This was a trap. Before Eleanor could deny the accusation, the thunder of hooves surrounded the cabin. A barrage of arrows whistled through the open door and windows, forcing the soldiers to take cover. Outside, warriors shouted to each other in Lakota. Lakota climbed from the cellar and called out in his native tongue. The arrows ceased immediately. In the sudden silence, the boy spoke again. Longer this time, his young voice carrying authority beyond his years. A deep voice responded from outside. After a pause, a tall warrior stepped into the doorway, bow drawn. His face was painted for war-black stripes across his cheekbones, contrasting with ochre covering his forehead. Feathers and bone beads adorned his long braids. The boy says you saved him from the shadow cat. The warrior said in surprisingly good English, his arrow still aimed at Lieutenant Wilson. He says the yellow-hair soldiers came to kill him, but you stood between them with your last bullet. I only did what any decent person would do. Eleanor replied, lowering her rifle slowly. He was injured. I couldn't send him away. The warrior studied her face, his dark eyes missing nothing. I am War Eagle, brother to the boy's father. We have been tracking the shadow cat that took our son's life. We followed its trail here. His gaze shifted to the dead panther. You have powerful medicine, white woman, to kill such a beast. Lieutenant Wilson had recovered some of his composure. This woman is under arrest for harboring an enemy combatant. He declared, though his voice lacked conviction, with an arrow pointed at his chest. Interfering will be considered an act of war. War Eagle's expression didn't change, but his bowstring tightened. There are 3 of you and 12 of us. Speak carefully, Yellowhair. The standoff was interrupted by the approach of more horses, a larger cavalry detachment led by a gray-haired officer with colonel's insignia. Wilson, the newcomer barked, dismounting outside. Report, we're Colonel Thornfield. Wilson responded, relief evident in his voice. We've discovered a Lakota boy hidden in this woman's cellar. When confronted, she threatened us, and now we're surrounded by hostiles. Thornfield surveyed the scene, the dead panther, the armed soldiers, War Eagle with his drawn bow, Eleanor standing protectively beside Lakota, and the Lakota warriors visible through the windows. Lower your weapons, he ordered his men. To War Eagle, he said, I am Colonel James Thornfield, representing the United States Army. What is your purpose here? War Eagle did not lower his bow. We came for the boy and the shadow cat that killed our son. Both are found. Now we will leave with what is ours. The boy was in restricted territory. Thornfield countered. That makes him a spy under military law. He is a child who was hunted by a predator. Eleanor interjected. He crossed the boundary line to escape death, nothing more. Thornfield's cold eyes fell on her. And you, madam, have committed treason by harboring him. The penalty for such an offense is hanging. War Eagle's warriors murmured angrily, outside arrows nocked and ready. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move from either side would trigger bloodshed. Lakota suddenly stepped forward, speaking clearly in his limited English. I not spy. I run from cat. He pointed to the dead panther, then to his healing wounds. She saved me. Give medicine. Hide me from soldiers who want kill me. The word of a savage means nothing. Thornfield dismissed. But mine should. Came a new voice from the doorway. An older officer stepped into the cabin, his uniform bearing a general's stars. Colonel, stand down your men immediately. General Morrison. Thornfield said, surprise evident in his tone. I wasn't informed you were in the area. Clearly. Morrison replied dryly. He nodded respectfully to War Eagle. It's been many seasons since we shared a peace pipe, old friend. The Lakota warrior lowered his bow slightly. The white father with honest tongue? It has been too long. Morrison turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Whitmore, I presume I'm General William Morrison. I was passing through with my escort when we heard gunfire. Perhaps you could explain what's happening here. Eleanor recounted the events of the past few days, finding Dakota wounded, hiding him from the patrol, the Panther's return, and the current standoff. As she spoke, Morrison's expression grew increasingly troubled. Where? Colonel Thornfield, he said when she finished. Is it the policy of your command to arrest civilians for rendering medical aid to injured children? Thornfield stiffened. Sir, the 1876 territorial order clearly states. I know what it states. Morrison interrupted sharply. I also know that nowhere does it suggest we murder children or punish those who show them compassion. He turned to War Eagle. Would you permit my surgeon to examine the boy, to confirm his injuries are as described? War Eagle nodded once, and Morrison gestured to a man waiting outside. A military doctor entered carrying a small bag. He knelt beside Dakota, examining the healing claw marks with professional detachment. Panther wounds without question, the doctor confirmed. 4 or 5 days old, well treated. The boy was fortunate to receive proper care so quickly. He glanced at Eleanor with newfound respect. These sutures are expertly done, ma'am. General Morrison nodded, decision made. Colonel Thornfield, you will withdraw your men immediately. The boy will return to his people, and Mrs. Whitmore will face no charges. General, with all due respect, Governor Thayer's orders, and I will be clarified by me personally. Morrison finished firmly. This woman has likely prevented a massacre today. Do you think these warriors would have quietly accepted their nephew's execution? He gestured toward the door where more painted faces had appeared. Your patrol would have been the first casualties in a new wave of violence. Mrs. Whitmore's compassion may have saved your lives. Colonel Thornfield's jaw worked as he struggled to contain his anger, but rank prevailed. He ordered his men outside, pausing at the door to deliver a final threat. This isn't over, Mrs. Whitmore. The territorial governor will hear about your sympathies. When the colonel had gone, Morrison sighed heavily. I apologize for Colonel Thornfield. Too many officers confuse cruelty with strength. He turned to War Eagle. Will you accept the boy's return and consider this matter resolved peacefully? The Lakota warrior studied Eleanor for a long moment before responding. The white woman has earned the gratitude of my people. She fought the shadow cat to protect our blood. This creates a sacred debt. No debt is necessary, Eleanor said. I only did what was right. War Eagle shook his head. What is right must be honored, or we become less than human. He removed a necklace of bear claws from around his neck and placed it in her hands. My people will know this sign. You will not be harmed by any who follow the old ways. Dakota stepped forward and spoke rapidly to War Eagle, gesturing toward Eleanor with obvious insistence. The warrior listened, then nodded gravely. My nephew wishes to say something to you, War Eagle told Eleanor. In your tongue, so you will understand his heart. Dakota took a deep breath, forming the English words with careful precision. You fight Death Cat for me. You fight soldiers for me. My people say life for life makes sacred bond. He placed his small hand over his heart. I not forget. Never. Eleanor knelt to meet the boy's eyes. You're very brave, Dakota. I won't forget you either. The boy impulsively threw his arms around her neck, hugging her tightly before stepping back embarrassed by his display of emotion. War Eagle placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. We must return to our people, the warrior said. The boy's father believes his son walks with the ancestors. There will be much joy when he sees this is not so. As the Lakota prepared to depart, General Morrison drew Eleanor aside. You've placed yourself in a precarious position, Mrs. Whitmore. Thornfield has influence with the governor. I couldn't have acted differently, General. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps not. Still, you might consider relocating to a settlement where you'd have neighbors for protection. Eleanor gazed around at the cabin she and James had built the land they had tamed together. This is my home, General. I won't be driven from it by fear. Then you're braver than most of my officers, Morrison said with a small smile. I'll do what I can to shield you from official repercussions, but be vigilant. These are dangerous times, especially for those who choose compassion over hatred. After the general departed, Eleanor stood in her doorway, watching the Lakota warriors ride away, with Dakota secured safely among them. The boy turned once to wave a small figure against the vast Wyoming landscape. Eleanor raised her hand in farewell, wondering if their paths would ever cross again. That night, as she cleaned the Panther's blood from her floor and repaired the shattered lean-to door, Eleanor contemplated the day's events. She had defied military orders, faced down armed soldiers, and allied briefly with warriors her neighbors would call savages. Yet she felt no regret, only a quiet certainty that she had honored James's memory and her own principles. As summer turned to autumn, Eleanor continued her solitary life, though not as alone as before. True to War Eagle's word, Lakota hunters occasionally appeared at the edge of her clearing, silently leaving dressed game or tanned hides before disappearing into the trees. She would find their gifts in the morning, a sign of ongoing respect and protection. The first snow had just dusted the Medicine Bow Peaks when a territorial marshal arrived with orders for Eleanor to appear before a military commission in Cheyenne. The charges aiding hostile forces and obstructing military operations carried severe penalties. Eleanor packed a small bag left food for her animals and rode beside the marshal toward an uncertain fate. The hearing was held in a stuffy room at Fort Russell, with Colonel Thornfield presenting the case against her. Eleanor sat straight-backed and dignified as he described her treasonous sympathy for the enemies of American expansion. She declined the offer of legal representation, choosing to speak for herself when the time came. Just as the three-officer panel prepared to deliberate, the doors swung open. General Morrison entered, accompanied by an unexpected figure, Governor Thayer himself. The room rose in surprise. Gentlemen, the governor announced, this hearing is concluded. The charges against Mrs. Whitmore are dismissed. Colonel Thornfield protested loudly until silenced by Morrison's raised hand. The general produced a letter bearing the seal of the Department of War. New directives from Washington. Morrison explained. President Grant has authorized a peace initiative with several Lakota bands, including those led by War Eagle. Mrs. Whitmore's actions, far from being treasonous, align perfectly with this diplomatic approach. Governor Thayer addressed Eleanor directly. It seems your compassion was more politically astute than Thornfield's aggression, Mrs. Whitmore. The federal government is pursuing peace treaties where possible. Warriors like War Eagle who show willingness to avoid conflict are precisely the leaders we hope to bring into these negotiations. Eleanor understood the political maneuvering at work. Her case had become convenient for those seeking to justify a new approach to Native relations. She caught a strange look passing between the governor and Thornfield, a moment of silent communication that seemed at odds with their opposing positions. I'm grateful for your intervention, Governor. she said carefully. I only hope similar compassion might be extended to others caught between worlds not of their making. Thornfield stormed from the room, his ambitions thwarted. As he passed Eleanor, he whispered words meant only for her ears. This victory will cost you more than you know, widow. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine, but she maintained her composure. The governor's aide escorted her outside to where a cavalry detail waited to return her to her homestead. As they prepared to depart, Lieutenant Wilson approached, his expression uncharacteristically subdued. Mrs. Whitmore, he said quietly, a word in private. She followed him a short distance from the others, wary but curious. I wanted you to know. Wilson began, his voice low. Thornfield isn't just angry about a failed prosecution. There's valuable land at stake, your land. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Railroad surveyors found silver deposits in the Medicine Bow foothills last month. Your property sits on what they believe is the richest vein. Wilson glanced nervously toward the fort. Thornfield and certain investors, including Governor Thayer, have been acquiring land throughout that valley. Your parcel is the missing piece. The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. So this was never about the boy or military regulations. The Lakota child gave them the pretext they needed. If you'd been convicted of treason, your land would have been forfeit to the territory. Wilson shifted uncomfortably. Morrison's intervention spoiled their plans, but Thornfield isn't one to surrender easily. Why are you telling me this? Eleanor asked, studying the lieutenant's face. Wilson touched the healing scratches on his cheek, souvenirs from the Panther. My father was killed by Comanche when I was 12. I've carried that hatred for 15 years. He paused. But watching you risk everything for an enemy child, it made me question things I thought I knew. Eleanor considered his words carefully. Thank you for the warning, Lieutenant. I'll be vigilant. Do more than that, Mrs. Whitmore. Be prepared. The ride back to her cabin took 2 days through early winter weather. Eleanor's mind churned with Wilson's revelation. Her isolated homestead, once a sanctuary, now represented something far more dangerous, an obstacle to powerful men's ambitions. She arrived home to find her cabin undisturbed, but for a startling addition. A freshly skinned elk hanging from her porch beam, a clear sign that her Lakota protectors had maintained their vigilance in her absence. The gift provided welcome meat for the approaching winter, but also served as a reminder that she now existed in a complex web of alliances and enmities not entirely of her making. 2 weeks later, just as the first heavy snow blanketed the valley, Eleanor received unexpected visitors. A young Lakota woman arrived at her door, accompanying a familiar figure, Dakota, fully healed and smiling shyly. Through the woman, who introduced herself as Mourning Dove, Eleanor learned that War Eagle's band had moved their winter camp closer to her valley than usual. Mourning Dove had been educated at a Pennsylvania mission school before returning to her people, and spoke excellent English. On War Eagle sends his respects. Mourning Dove explained as Dakota presented Eleanor with a beautifully crafted medicine pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. He says the elders have discussed your actions. They wish to invite you to a ceremony. What kind of ceremony? Eleanor asked, examining the gift with admiration, one not typically shared with white people. Mourning Dove replied, The elders believe you walk between worlds, not fully of your people anymore, not of ours, but something new. They call you a spirit walker. Eleanor was stunned by the invitation. Is it permitted for me to attend? It is requested. Mourning Dove corrected gently. Dakota's father, Black Hawk, wishes to look upon the face of the woman who saved his son when others of her kind would have killed him. Dakota spoke rapidly in Lakota, his hands moving expressively. Mourning Dove translated, He says the Shadow Cat's spirit watches over you now. Its strength is yours. Eleanor considered the risks of visiting a Lakota camp. If discovered by Thornfield or his allies, It would provide fresh ammunition against her. Yet refusing such an honor would be both disrespectful and a missed opportunity to strengthen the fragile alliance she had unwittingly formed. "Tell War Eagle I am honored by the invitation and will come," she decided. 3 days later, Eleanor rode beside Mourning Dove along hidden trails to Coda, leading them toward a sheltered valley where smoke from cooking fires rose against the mountains. The Lakota camp was smaller than Eleanor had imagined, perhaps 40 lodges arranged in a traditional circle. Children paused in their play to stare at the white woman. Women looked up from their work with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. War Eagle awaited them at the center of the camp, flanked by other leaders. His face remained impassive, but his eyes held respect as Eleanor dismounted. "The Spirit Walker comes as friend," he announced in English for her benefit. "She is under my protection." An elderly man with deeply lined features stepped forward, scrutinizing Eleanor intently. Mourning Dove whispered, "This is sees beyond the band's medicine man. He will conduct the ceremony." The old man spoke at length, gesturing toward the mountains. Mourning Dove translated, "He says your soul has 2 colors, one of your people, one not yet formed. Today the second color will take shape." As Eleanor prepared for the ceremony, a commotion arose at the camp's edge. A group of warriors rode in, led by a younger man, whose bearing radiated authority and barely contained aggression. He dismounted with fluid grace, his eyes immediately finding Eleanor among the gathered Lakota. "And Gray Wolf," Mourning Dove whispered tensely. "War Eagle's nephew. He leads the warriors who oppose peace with white settlers." Gray Wolf approached his gaze, never leaving Eleanor's face. Unlike War Eagle's measured dignity, the younger warrior radiated dangerous energy like lightning seeking ground. "So this is the white woman who bewitches my uncle," he said in flawless English, circling Eleanor slowly. "They say you fought a shadow cat to protect a Lakota child. They say you defied your own soldiers with a single bullet." His lips curved in a cold smile. "Impressive stories." "Not stories," War Eagle interjected. "Truth witnessed by many eyes." Gray Wolf completed his circle, stopping directly before Eleanor. "Do you know what your people did 3 days ago? Your soldiers burned 5 Lakota lodges on the Powder River. 2 children died in the flames." His voice remained eerily calm, though his eyes blazed. "Tell me, Spirit Walker, did you stand before those children with your last bullet?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I wasn't there. If I had been, I would have tried to save them as I would any child in danger." "Convenient words when no action is required," Gray Wolf replied. "Your kind speaks of peace, while your soldiers bring fire." War Eagle stepped between them. "The ceremony begins soon. This is not the time for such talk." Gray Wolf held Eleanor's gaze a moment longer before inclining his head slightly. "Very well, Uncle. I will watch this ceremony with great interest. Perhaps I will learn what magic this white woman possesses that makes wise men forget the blood of their own people." The tension lingered as preparations continued. Eleanor sensed the camp dividing into factions, those who welcomed her presence, and those who viewed it as a dangerous break with tradition. In Gray Wolf, she recognized a formidable opponent, intelligent, articulate, and driven by a righteous anger she couldn't entirely dismiss. The ceremony took place as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Eleanor was seated on a buffalo robe, facing east. Women painted her face with ochre and white clay, while seas beyond chanted prayers and burned sacred herbs. The smoke made Eleanor's eyes water, but she remained still, respecting the solemnity of the occasion. Dakota sat nearby with his father, Blackhawk, a powerfully built warrior whose stern face softened only when he looked at his son. Blackhawk had spoken no words directly to Eleanor, but his gaze communicated both gratitude and assessment, as if measuring her worthiness of the honor being bestowed. As the ceremony proceeded, Eleanor realized its significance went beyond merely thanking her. The Lakota were symbolically adopting her not as one of them, but as something between worlds. A bridge. War Eagle explained through Mourning Dove that such status would allow her to move between white and Lakota society with a degree of protection from both. My brother Blackhawk pledges his weapons to your defense, War Eagle told her as the ceremony concluded. If danger comes, light 3 fires on the hill behind your cabin. Our warriors will come. Eleanor was moved by the gesture, though she prayed such intervention would never be necessary. Tell Blackhawk I am honored by his pledge. I hope our peoples can find ways to live together without bloodshed. War Eagle's expression darkened slightly. Some wounds are too deep for easy healing. Thornfield is not alone in his hatred, nor are all my people united in seeking peace. His eyes drifted to where Grey Wolf sat with his followers, watching the proceedings with undisguised skepticism. There are young warriors who believe only resistance will save us. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your valley sits between worlds like you. It may become important ground in days to come. His cryptic warning stayed with Eleanor as she rode home that evening, Mourning Dove accompanying her to the edge of her property. The young Lakota woman hesitated before departing. There is something you should know. Mourning Dove said, her voice barely above a whisper. Grey Wolf spoke with a white man last moon, a man who wears a uniform like Thornfield's but hides his face. This man gives guns to Grey Wolf's warriors in exchange for promises. What kind of promises? Eleanor asked, a cold dread settling in her stomach. To attack certain settlers, but leave others untouched. Mourning Dove glanced nervously over her shoulder. Some believe this man works for those who want land for the Iron Horse path. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Thornfield and his investors weren't just waiting for Eleanor to abandon her land, and they were actively creating conditions to force her out. Grey Wolf's band provided the perfect instrument, whether the young warrior realized it or not. Does War Eagle know about this? Mourning Dove shook her head. Grey Wolf keeps many secrets from his uncle, but the elders see more than the young think. She touched Eleanor's arm lightly. Be careful, Spirit Walker. You stand between forces greater than one woman alone should face. As autumn progressed into early winter, Eleanor's life settled into an uneasy rhythm. She maintained her homestead while watching for signs of the coming storm. Twice she encountered territorial patrols and noted how they now gave her cabin a wide berth. Word had spread the widow Whitmore had powerful allies on both sides of the conflict. December brought heavy snow and bitter cold. Eleanor spent her days tending livestock, mending clothes, and reading by lamplight. The isolation that had once seemed oppressive now felt like a reprieve, a period of grace, before the inevitable confrontation. That reprieve ended 3 weeks before Christmas, when a group of riders approached her cabin, not soldiers or Lakota, but settlers led by Ezra Hollister, who owned the general store in the nearest settlement. His usually affable face was set in grim lines as he dismounted stiffly. Mrs. Whitmore. He greeted her. Hope we're not intruding, but there's a matter needs discussing. Eleanor invited them in, noting the nervous glances the men cast toward the tree line, as if expecting Lakota warriors to materialize from the shadows. 5 men crowded around her small table. Hollister, the blacksmith Josiah Peters, and 3 farmers whose names escaped her. We've heard rumors, Hollister began without preamble, about you being friendly with the Lakota, about you being invited to their camp for some heathen ritual. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Not rumors if they're true, Mr. Hollister. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Peters leaned forward, his massive blacksmith's hands curled into fists on the table. Mrs. Whitmore, we've always respected your grit staying out here alone after your husband passed. But this fraternizing with savages, it puts all of us at risk. How so? Eleanor asked coolly. Has my friendship with the Lakota brought harm to any settler? That ain't what's happened, it's what could happen, one of the farmers interjected. Folks are saying you're passing information to them, telling them about troop movements, settler defenses. That's absurd, Eleanor replied, our anger rising in her voice. I've done nothing of the sort. Hollister raised a placating hand. No one's making accusations, Mrs. Whitmore. But appearances matter. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. There's talk of Lakota raids increasing to the north. If they come this way, and your place is the only one left standing, well, people will draw their own conclusions. Eleanor understood the veiled threat. Are you suggesting my neighbors might take action against me based on nothing but speculation? I'm suggesting, Hollister replied, that it might be safer for everyone if you considered relocating to town. I could make you a fair offer on this place. Not full value, mind you, at being so close to Lakota territory, but enough to set you up someplace more civilized. The true purpose of their visit became clear. Land speculation masked as concern for her safety. These men didn't fear for her, they hoped to profit from her departure. Eleanor wondered if they knew about the silver deposits Lieutenant Wilson had mentioned, or if they were merely pawns in Thornfield's larger scheme. I appreciate your concern, gentlemen, Eleanor said, rising from her chair to signal the end of the conversation. But this is my home. I have no intention of leaving it. You're making a mistake, Peters warned. Winter's the worst time to be alone out here, especially with tensions rising. What if renegade braves decide you've chosen sides? Or what if the army decides the same? Eleanor walked to the door and opened it, letting in a blast of cold air. I've survived 3 winters alone already, Mr. Peters. I expect I'll manage a 4th. Good day, gentlemen. The men departed, muttering among themselves. Eleanor watched them ride away, troubled by the encounter. She had anticipated opposition from the military or territorial officials, not from her fellow settlers. The realization of her true isolation settled over her like the winter snow, deep, heavy, and potentially lethal if underestimated. That night, Eleanor sat by her fire, considering her options. Her contemplation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Hand on her rifle, Eleanor approached cautiously. Who's there? Morning Dove, came the reply. I come alone with urgent news. Eleanor opened the door to find the young Lakota woman shivering on her porch snow, dusting her woolen blanket. Come in by the fire, Eleanor urged, helping her inside. What brings you out on such a cold night? Morning Dove warmed her hands by the flames before speaking. War Eagle sends warning. Grey Wolf's band has broken from the council. They reject peace talks and plan to strike settlements in this territory before the moon is full again. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Does War Eagle know which settlements? Not yet. But Grey Wolf was seen meeting with the masked soldier again. They spoke long into the night. Morning Dove's expression grew troubled. War Eagle believes Grey Wolf is being used by those who want conflict, but his influence wanes among the younger men who see negotiation as surrender. And the settler who asked to buy my land today, Hollister, do you know if he's connected to this masked soldier or Colonel Thornfield? Morning. Dove's eyes widened slightly. The traitor with a wooden leg, he meets with a masked soldier at the crossing of 2 rivers. My brother followed them once, but dared not get close enough to hear their words. The pieces of the conspiracy were falling into place. Eleanor now understood she faced not just isolated threats, but a coordinated effort to drive her from her land and reignite conflict between settlers and Lakota. Both sides were being manipulated by men whose only loyalty was to profit. A War Eagle asks if you will come to council tomorrow. Morning Dove continued. As one who walks between worlds, your words may carry weight. Eleanor considered the request. Attending a war council would certainly be viewed as treasonous by Thornfield and his supporters. Yet, if she could help prevent violence against innocent families, both settler and Lakota, wasn't that worth the risk? "Tell War Eagle I will come," she decided. The next day dawned clear and bitterly cold. Eleanor rode beside Mourning Dove to a different location, a sheltered canyon where several bands had gathered for the council. More lodges than before dotted the landscape, smoke rising from dozens of fires. Warriors in winter garb watched her pass, their expressions ranging from respect to open hostility. War Eagle greeted her at the central council fire, where 10 men sat in a circle. Among them was General Morrison, looking uncomfortable but determined. Eleanor took her place in the circle, acutely aware of being the only woman present and one of only 2 white people. The council began with ritual pipe smoking and formal statements from each leader. Some spoke in Lakota, others in halting English. Eleanor listened as Mourning Dove translated the proceedings. The situation was dire. Grey Wolf's band had already struck a small army outpost near the Powder River, killing 2 soldiers and stealing horses. Colonel Thornfield was using the incident to push for military action against all Lakota in the territory, peaceful or not. When her turn came to speak, Eleanor chose her words carefully. "I understand the anger of the young warriors. They see promises broken, land taken, and people starving. But I have also seen settlers, women and children, who came here seeking only a home, not war or conquest. If violence spreads, these innocent ones will suffer first." She paused, then added what she had learned about Thornfield's conspiracy. "Someone is working to inflame tensions for profit. Colonel Thornfield and his investors have discovered silver on my land and likely throughout the valley. They need war between our peoples to clear the territory for mining." An older chief named Standing Bear responded through Mourning Dove. "The white government has always wanted our land. Why should we believe this time is different?" General Morrison spoke next. "Because this time we have proof of corruption. Lieutenant Wilson has been gathering evidence against Colonel Thornfield, communications with mining interests, diverted military supplies, secret meetings with land speculators." Mrs. Whitmore's testimony adds the final piece. Eleanor was stunned by this revelation. "Wilson has been investigating Thornfield," Morrison nodded, "for months. He came to me after your confrontation at the cabin. Something about your courage made him question his allegiances." As the council continued, a commotion erupted at the camp's perimeter. Warriors rushed to intercept riders approaching through the snow, a small band of Lakota, led by Grey Wolf, his face painted for war. The young leader strode directly to the council circle, ignoring protocol. His eyes widened momentarily at the sight of Eleanor and Morrison, then narrowed with contempt. "So the rumors are true," he said in clear English. "My uncle parleys with our enemies while our people starve." He spat on the ground. "I found 2 white hunters in our territory this morning. They will not hunt there again." A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. War Eagle rose slowly, his dignified bearing a stark contrast to his nephew's aggressive stance. "Did these hunters attack you?" the older man asked. "Did they threaten our people?" Grey Wolf sneered. "They existed on our land. That is threat enough." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. This was the face of hatred that mirrored Colonel Thornfield's absolute and unyielding seeing only enemies where others might find common ground. Violence without purpose only brings more violence. War Eagle said calmly, "This is the way of the endless blood circle. Is that the legacy you seek, nephew? I seek survival for our people." Grey Wolf shouted, his control slipping. "While you sit by fires with white devils, our children grow weak from hunger. The buffalo are gone, driven away, or slaughtered by white hunters. Our hunting grounds shrink with each season." He pointed accusingly at Eleanor and Morrison. "And you invite them into our council?" General Morrison stood, his weathered face solemn. I cannot change the past, but I offer a path forward. The government has authorized me to distribute food stores to peaceful bands enough to last through winter while we negotiate permanent hunting rights. Grey Wolf laughed bitterly. More promises, more lies. He turned to the gathered warriors. Who among you will follow strength instead of weakness? Who will stand with me to drive the invaders from our land? Nearly half the younger warriors moved to Grey Wolf's side, a significant show of support that clearly troubled War Eagle. The band stood at a crossroads dividing before Eleanor's eyes. Mourning Dove touched Eleanor's arm. "Speak now," she whispered urgently, "before it's too late." Eleanor rose, conscious of all eyes turning to her. "I am not here to tell the Lakota what path to choose. That is not my right." She held Grey Wolf's hostile gaze without flinching. "But I have seen the results of hatred, both white and Lakota. It leaves nothing but graves and grief." She recounted finding Dakota wounded and desperate, how compassion had created an unexpected bond between people taught to fear each other. She described Colonel Thornfield's eagerness for conflict and how it mirrored Grey Wolf's rhetoric of absolutes. There are those on both sides who believe only one people can survive. She concluded. They are wrong. This land is vast enough for all if we have the wisdom to share it and the courage to see each other as human beings first. Then she revealed her most dangerous knowledge, the meetings between Grey Wolf and the masked soldier. "You believe you fight for your people's freedom," she told the young warrior directly. "But you're being used as a weapon by those who want your land. The masked soldier who gives you guns doesn't serve your cause. He serves the men who discovered silver in these mountains." Grey Wolf's expression shifted from contempt to shock, then fury. "You lie," he snarled, advancing toward Eleanor. War Eagle stepped between them. "Is it a lie, nephew? How did you acquire those new rifles your warriors carry? The ones with the scratched-off army markings?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Grey Wolf's eyes. "This changes nothing. Whether they want our deaths or our land, and the white men remain our enemies." Not all of them," came a voice from the edge of the council. Dakota stepped forward, standing tall despite his youth. "She is not enemy. She saved me when she could have let me die. Her blood mixed with mine on the floor of her lodge when the Shadow Cat attacked." The boy's voice rang with conviction beyond his years. "I have seen both darkness and light in white hearts, just as there is both in ours." A heavy silence fell over the council. Grey Wolf stared at his young cousin, anger warring with reluctant consideration. Finally, he turned to War Eagle. 3 days, he said abruptly. "I give you 3 days to prove these claims about the masked soldier and the silver. My warriors will wait in the northern hills. If you bring no proof, we attack the settlements as planned." Eleanor realized this thin thread of hope rested entirely on their ability to unmask Thornfield's conspiracy in just 3 days. As Grey Wolf and his followers departed, she turned to General Morrison. "How do we prove what we know Thornfield won't have left evidence where it can be easily found?" Morrison's expression was grim. "We don't need to find all the evidence, just the masked soldier. According to my intelligence, he's Thornfield's adjutant, Captain Reed. If we can capture him meeting with the land speculators or with arms meant for Grey Wolf's warriors, we'll have what we need." "And how do we accomplish that in 3 days?" Eleanor asked. "We set a trap," Morrison replied, "using the one thing they all want most." He looked directly at Eleanor. "Your land." The plan came together swiftly. Eleanor would return to her cabin and publicly announce her intention to sell her property. The news would certainly reach Thornfield and Hollister, likely triggering a meeting to coordinate their response. Lieutenant Wilson, who had been trailing the conspirators for weeks, would track their movements while Morrison positioned troops to intercept. "It's dangerous," Morrison warned. Once they know you're willing to sell, they'll move quickly to secure the deal or eliminate you if you appear to be wavering. I've been in danger since the moment Dakota collapsed at my door, Eleanor replied. At least now I'm choosing the battlefield. The next morning, Eleanor rode into the settlement and made her announcement at Hollister's store, ensuring plenty of witnesses heard her declare her intention to sell her homestead. By noon, a rider had been dispatched toward Fort Laramie, undoubtedly carrying news to Thornfield. Eleanor returned to her cabin to wait the trap baited. She didn't have to wait long. Shortly after dusk, Hollister arrived alone, his manner considerably more friendly than during his previous visit. "I heard you've reconsidered my offer, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, warming his hands by her fire. "Wise decision. Winter's only going to get harsher." "I'm considering all offers," Eleanor replied carefully. "It seems my property has suddenly become quite popular." Hollister's eyes narrowed slightly. "Popular? Who else has approached you?" "A representative from the railroad was asking about the valley last week. Seemed particularly interested in the southern slopes." The lie had its intended effect. Hollister's face tightened with barely concealed alarm. "The railroad men don't understand this territory like locals do. They'll offer fancy prices, then leave you holding worthless paper when their companies fold." He leaned forward intently. "I can pay cash tonight. Enough for a fresh start in Cheyenne, maybe even back east." "That's a generous offer, Mr. Hollister. I'll need until tomorrow to consider it properly." Hollister frowned. "Tomorrow might be too late. There are rumors of Lakota war parties moving in this direction. I wouldn't want to see you caught in something ugly." The threat behind his concern was barely disguised. "I appreciate your worry, but I've lived with danger before. I'll have my answer in the morning." After Hollister departed, Eleanor extinguished most of her lamps, but kept watch through the darkened window. Sure enough, rather than returning to the settlement, Hollister's track led toward the river crossing where Morning Dove had mentioned he met with the masked soldier. Eleanor slipped out into the night, following at a cautious distance. The three-quarter moon provided enough light to trace Hollister's path through the snow. At the river crossing, three figures waited Hollister, another man she recognized as a land speculator from Cheyenne, and a uniformed officer with his face obscured by a scarf, despite the night's relative warmth. She crept close enough to hear their conversation and the cold ground seeping through her clothing as she lay hidden behind a fallen log. "She's ready to sell," Hollister was saying. "Mentioned railroad interest, probably fishing for a higher offer." "The railroad isn't due to survey this region for another year," the speculator replied irritably. "She's bluffing." The masked soldier, Captain Reed, if Morrison was correct, spoke with cold precision. "It doesn't matter. We need this resolved before the governor's inspection tour next week. If Morrison brings him here and shows him what we've been doing, the entire operation collapses." "So what's the plan?" Hollister asked. "I offered cash, but she wants to wait." "She won't be selling to anyone," Reed replied. "Grey Wolf's warriors attack the day after tomorrow. We've supplied them with enough weapons to ensure this valley is cleared of all complications." Eleanor's blood ran cold. They didn't just want her land, they planned to use Grey Wolf's warriors to eliminate witnesses and evidence of their conspiracy. "What about the woman?" the speculator asked. "She knows too much. Been talking to Morrison." "An unfortunate casualty of Indian violence," Reed said dismissively. "Very tragic. Colonel Thornfield will personally lead the punitive expedition afterward, ensuring any remaining Lakota are driven from the territory permanently." The full horror of their scheme became clear to Eleanor. Thornfield and his conspirators would use Grey Wolf's attack to justify a massive military response, one that would eliminate the Lakota presence and clear the way for unfettered mining operations. Both settler and native lives were merely pawns in their pursuit of wealth. As she backed away to report what she'd learned, a twig snapped beneath her boot. The conspirators fell silent instantly. "What was that?" Hollister hissed. "Probably deer," the speculator replied, but Reed was already drawing his pistol. "Check it out," he ordered. Eleanor retreated as quickly as she dared, but the sound of pursuit grew closer. Just as she reached the tree line, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark inches from her head. She ran then, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind her, shouted commands indicated at least 2 men were giving chase. Her cabin lay a quarter-mile ahead, but reaching it would reveal her identity to the pursuers. Instead, Eleanor veered toward the hill behind her property, the one where War Eagle had instructed her to light 3 fires if she needed help. Her lungs burned in the cold air as she pushed upward through deepening snow. A rifle cracked the bullet, passing close enough that she felt its wind. Eleanor risked a glance back. Reed and another soldier were following her trail in the moonlight. They would catch her before she could reach the hilltop. Making a split-second decision, Eleanor dropped into a ravine, working her way along its rocky bottom, where she would leave minimal tracks. The icy water soaking through her boots numbed her feet, but she pushed forward, desperation lending her strength. The ravine opened into a small clearing, dominated by a massive dead pine struck by lightning years earlier. Its bleached trunk stood like a sentinel against the night sky. Eleanor scrambled up the slope and circled behind it, just as Reed entered the clearing below. "She can't have gone far," he called to his companion. "The tracks lead this way." Eleanor pressed herself against the cold bark, controlling her breathing despite the painful hammering of her heart. Reed moved methodically up the slope, pistol ready. In the moonlight, his face was finely visible, the mask lowered in the exertion of pursuit. She recognized him from the military tribunal, a thin-faced man with cold eyes who had stood at Thornfield's shoulder throughout the proceedings. He paused just 15 feet below her position, scanning the terrain. One more step, and he would see her footprints leading behind the tree. Eleanor remained perfectly still, not daring to reach for the small knife at her belt, her only weapon. A howl broke the silence, a wolf, but something in its tone made the hairs on Eleanor's neck rise. It was answered by another closer, then a third. Reed and his companion froze. "Wolves?" the other soldier whispered nervously. Reed shook his head slowly. "No. Lakota signal." He raised his voice. "Who's there? Show yourself." Silence answered him, but Eleanor sensed movement in the tree line. Dark shapes slipped between trunks, warriors moving with the soundless precision of wolves. Reed saw them too, and raised his pistol but hesitated, outnumbered and exposed. A lone figure stepped into the moonlight, bow drawn, and aimed directly at Reed's chest. War Eagle's voice carried clearly in the still night air. "Lower your weapon, masked soldier." Reed's companion dropped his rifle, immediately raising his hands. Reed himself was made of sterner material. "You're violating the treaty boundary, savage. Return to your territory immediately. This is Lakota hunting ground." War Eagle replied calmly. "It is you who trespass. You who bring weapons to young warriors and whisper of attacks on settlements." He took another step forward. "You who tell different lies to different ears, hoping to set fire that consumes both peoples." Reed's eyes darted around the clearing, calculating his odds. In that moment of distraction, Eleanor moved, stepping out from behind the tree to reveal herself. "Captain Reed," she said clearly. "I heard everything at the river crossing. Your plot with Thornfield, the planned attack, all of it." Reed's face contorted with fury. He swung his pistol toward Eleanor with deadly intent. "You meddling bitch." The arrow took him through the shoulder before he could finish the impact, spinning him half around. His pistol discharged harmlessly into the ground as he fell to his knees, cursing in pain. War Eagle approached 2 warriors moving forward to secure the soldiers. "You followed our enemy," he said to Eleanor, "at great risk." "I had to know the truth," she replied. "Grey Wolf isn't the only one being manipulated. Thornfield plans to sacrifice my neighbors, your people, all for silver in the mountains." War Eagle nodded grimly. Such madness for shiny rocks. He looked down at the wounded Reed. This one will speak his crimes before both our peoples. The masked face is unmasked. By dawn, Eleanor, War Eagle, and their prisoners had reached General Morrison's camp. The general listened gravely to Eleanor's account of the conspiracy, while Reed sat sullenly under guard, his wounded shoulder bandaged. "We need to move quickly," Morrison said when she finished. "Thornfield doesn't know his plan has been exposed. We can catch him and his conspirators before they realize Reed has been captured." "What about Grey Wolf?" Eleanor asked. "He's still planning to attack the settlements tomorrow. I'll send riders to find him." War Eagle promised. Now that we have proof of this treachery, he may listen. Morrison dispatched troops to arrest Hollister and the other conspirators, while he personally led a detachment to Fort Laramie to confront Thornfield. Eleanor remained at the camp exhausted, but unable to rest until she knew whether they had truly prevented the impending violence. Late that afternoon, riders approached the camp Grey Wolf and his warriors, accompanied by the messengers War Eagle had sent. The young leader's face was unreadable as he dismounted and approached the tent where Reed was being held. For a long moment, Grey Wolf simply stared at the captive officer, recognizing the man who had supplied him with weapons while encouraging attacks on specific targets. Without a word, he turned to where Eleanor sat beside War Eagle. The spirit walker was right, he acknowledged reluctantly. We were being used to clear the land for their greed. His jaw tightened with barely controlled fury. They would have had us kill their enemies, then sent soldiers to slaughter us for the crime. War Eagle placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. Now you understand why I counsel patience, Grey Wolf. Our enemies often destroy themselves if we but watch and wait. Grey Wolf shook off the hand. Patience has cost us our hunting grounds, our buffalo, our children's lives. How much more must we lose before patience is revealed as another word for surrender? Not surrender, Eleanor interjected. Wisdom. There's a difference between bowing to injustice and choosing your battles carefully. Grey Wolf turned his piercing gaze on her. Easy words from one who still has a home to defend. A home I nearly lost because I chose compassion over hate. Eleanor replied evenly. I don't pretend to know your suffering, but I've seen enough death to know it rarely solves anything. Before Grey Wolf could respond, a commotion erupted at the camp's edge. General Morrison had returned his uniform dusty from hard riding. Behind him, soldiers led a manacled Colonel Thornfield into the camp. The colonel's usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his face contorted with rage when he spotted Eleanor among the Lakota. Traitorous bitch, he spat. You've conspired with savages against your own kind. Morrison shoved him roughly forward. Be silent, Thornfield. You've done enough damage. To the gathered leaders, he announced, Colonel Thornfield has been relieved of command pending court-martial for conspiracy weapons trafficking and inciting violence against civilians. We found documents in his quarters detailing the entire scheme maps of silver deposits, lists of parcels to be acquired, and communications with mining interests in Chicago. Eleanor felt a wave of relief. The evidence was irrefutable. And the others, Hollister, arrested along with 3 land speculators and 2 officers who were part of the conspiracy. The governor has ordered a full investigation. Morrison's weathered face showed grim satisfaction. It seems your courage has exposed corruption that reaches into the highest levels of territorial administration. Thornfield glared at Eleanor with undisguised hatred. You have no idea what forces you're interfering with, woman. The territory's development won't be stopped by one sentimental widow and a general with misguided sympathies for Indians. War Eagle studied Thornfield with a dispassionate interest one might show a particularly venomous snake. This man's spirit is twisted beyond repair, he observed. Even captured, he believes himself righteous. What happens now? Eleanor asked Morrison. Thornfield and his conspirators will be transported to Cheyenne for trial. The governor is eager to demonstrate that justice applies even to men of rank, especially with elections approaching. Morrison turned to Grey Wolf. As for your band, I can offer safe passage back to your territory and the supplies I promised at the council. Grey Wolf's expression remained skeptical, but he nodded once. We will watch to see if your actions match your words, White General. The next time someone tries to use my warriors as tools for their greed, they may find us less forgiving. The crisis averted, Eleanor returned to her cabin the following day. She found it untouched, but felt different within its walls, more connected to the land and people around her, yet somehow less tethered to the identity she had carried from Boston so many years ago. War Eagle's words echoed in her mind, a spirit walker moving between worlds. Winter deepened across the Wyoming territory. Snow blanketed the valleys, and drifts piled against Eleanor's cabin walls. News arrived sporadically. Thornfield had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. Governor Thayer, implicated in the conspiracy, had resigned in disgrace. The silver deposits, while real, were less extensive than initially believed, dampening immediate interest in mining the region. A tentative peace held nurtured by General Morrison's fair-minded administration of the territory's military affairs. Food and supplies reached the Lakota camps as promised, though Eleanor knew such relief was temporary at best. The forces driving white settlement westward wouldn't be held at bay forever, regardless of individual acts of justice or compassion. On the winter solstice, but the longest night of the year, Eleanor received an unexpected visit. Mourning Dove arrived with Dakota and, surprisingly, Grey Wolf. The young warrior's demeanor had changed, still proud, but less hostile, as if some internal fire had been banked without being extinguished. We bring news, Mourning Dove explained as they warmed themselves by Eleanor's fire. The council has decided that when spring comes, our band will request formal recognition of hunting rights in this valley. General Morrison believes the new governor will approve, especially after what happened with Thornfield. That's wonderful, Eleanor said sincerely. Grey Wolf spoke, his voice measured. The spirits have strange ways of working their will. My hatred of white settlers nearly led our people into destruction. Your compassion for a wounded boy led to our salvation. He met her eyes directly. I still believe much blood will flow before our peoples find true peace. But I acknowledge that you walk a different path, one I did not believe possible until now. It's a narrow path, Eleanor admitted. One that often feels lonely. Grey Wolf reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small carved figure, a panther crafted from gleaming black stone. When you face the shadow paths alone, remember the guardian spirit that led you to this moment. He placed it in her palm. The shadow cat watches over you now. The gift left Eleanor speechless. From Grey Wolf, this acknowledgement represented a profound shift, not to friendship exactly, but to a wary respect that might in time grow into something more. Dakota had grown taller in the months since she'd first treated his wounds. Now he stepped forward with his own, offering an exquisitely crafted dream catcher, its willow hoop interwoven with sinew in patterns more complex than any she had seen before. Small beads and feathers adorned the edges, catching the firelight with subtle gleams. I made it over the winter, he said proudly in much improved English. For your protection. Eleanor accepted the gift with genuine emotion. It's beautiful, Dakota. The boy's expression grew serious beyond his years. The outer circle represents the path you walk between our worlds. The web inside catches bad dreams, bad thoughts between our peoples. The hole in the center lets good thoughts pass through. He paused. My grandmother helped me with the pattern. She says it will protect your spirit on the difficult road ahead. As winter gradually yielded to spring, Eleanor's position in the territory evolved into something unprecedented. Settlers regarded her with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant respect, the woman who had exposed Thornfield's corruption and prevented a devastating war. The Lakota treated her with growing acceptance, particularly after War Eagle's band established their spring camp just 3 miles from her property. General Morrison facilitated a formal agreement recognizing Lakota hunting rights in the valley while guaranteeing settler homesteads would remain undisturbed. It wasn't a permanent solution. Both sides knew larger forces would eventually reshape the territory. But it created a fragile space where coexistence could be tested and perhaps proven viable. Eleanor found herself increasingly called upon to mediate minor disputes between settlers and Lakota hunters. Her cabin became neutral ground, where representatives from both communities could meet without fear. Though some hardliners on both sides refused to acknowledge her authority, many recognized the practical value of having someone who understood both perspectives. One crisp April morning, Eleanor stood on her porch watching the sunrise paint the distant peaks in hues of gold and rose. The winter's trials had changed her in ways she was still discovering. The widow who had once measured her days by simple chores and silent memories now stood at the center of forces that would shape the territory's future. Lieutenant Wilson rode up now, wearing captain's insignia, his reward for helping expose Thornfield's conspiracy. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore." He greeted her, dismounting stiffly. "Thought you'd want to know the new mining regulations have been approved. Any silver found in this valley will be extracted under strict oversight, with fair compensation to both settlers and tribes for use of the land." "Will it make any difference?" Eleanor asked. "Or just slow the inevitable?" Wilson removed his hat, running a hand through hair prematurely graying at the temples. "I can't promise you a happy ending, ma'am. The railroad's coming more settlers, too. Change is the only certainty." He gazed toward the distant Lakota camp, where smoke from morning fires rose against the clear sky. "But maybe, just maybe, it doesn't have to come with quite so much bloodshed." "A slim hope," Eleanor observed, "but better than none." "Speaking of hope," Wilson said, reaching into his saddlebag, "this came for you." He handed her an official-looking envelope bearing the territorial governor's seal. Eleanor opened it, scanning the contents with growing surprise. "They're offering me a position, special liaison for Native Affairs." She looked up at Wilson. "Is this real?" "Governor's idea. After what happened with Thornfield, he wants someone who understands both sides." Wilson smiled slightly. "Can't think of anyone better qualified than the woman who faced down a panther with her last bullet." Eleanor folded the letter carefully. "I'll need to think about it, of course." Wilson mounted his horse. "Just don't think too long. Times are changing fast, Mrs. Whitmore. People like you, bridges between worlds, are going to be needed more than ever." As Wilson rode away, Eleanor considered his words. Accepting the position would mean leaving the solitude she had both endured and come to appreciate. It would place her more firmly in the complex currents of territorial politics, with all its dangers and compromises. Yet it might also allow her to help shape what was coming rather than merely witness it. She walked to the edge of her property, where the land sloped gently toward the valley below. In the distance, Lakota hunters moved across the greening landscape, while to the east, smoke from settlers' chimneys marked the steady advance of a different way of life. Between them stood Eleanor's cabin, a small outpost of possibility in contested terrain. That evening, as shadows lengthened across her yard, Eleanor hung Dakota's dreamcatcher above her bed. The intricate web caught the last rays of sunlight, casting delicate patterns across her cabin walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices to make. Tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction in the peace she had helped create, fragile and imperfect, but real nonetheless. Outside, a wolf howled in the gathering dusk, its voice neither mournful nor threatening, but simply declaring its presence in a changing world. Another answered from further away. Then a third, a conversation, carrying across boundaries humans had imposed, but nature ignored. Eleanor stepped onto her porch and listened to their chorus, finding in it an unexpected harmony. The path between worlds would never be easy, but perhaps it didn't have to be walked alone. Eleanor Whitmore, once defined by what she had lost, now stood at the threshold of something new, a future shaped not by hatred or fear, but by the radical proposition that compassion might be stronger than either. As stars emerged in the deepening blue above, she thought of James and the dreams they had shared for this land. He couldn't have imagined how those dreams would transform, how his widow would become something neither settler nor native had anticipated, a bridge across the chasm of misunderstanding that had claimed so many lives. Eleanor touched the bear claw necklace War Eagle had given her, then the stone panther from Grey Wolf. Symbols of respect from two worlds that saw her as belonging to neither, fully yet connected to both. The burden of that position was heavy, but for the first time since finding a wounded boy on her doorstep, she felt equal to its weight. The woman who had once been Mrs. James Whitmore of Boston, then the widow Whitmore of Wyoming territory, had become something else entirely, the spirit walker, forging a path where none had existed before. What that path would ultimately lead to, not even the wisest among either people could say, but Eleanor had taken the first steps and others had begun to follow. It was enough for now. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, beneath the vast Wyoming sky, where stars scattered like promises across the darkness, she allowed herself to believe that even the smallest light could guide travelers safely through the Shadowlands.